Hi, it's me again. And this is class 7 and talk about feeding our goats. Um, just to get this out of the way, I fell the other day and gave myself a good bruise. So it looks much worse than it is, but it is what it is. I thought I'd wear a matching outfit. So when it comes to feeding goats, it's not as easy as people think it is, um, but it doesn't have to be that complicated either. If you think about what goats would eat in the wild, they would basically eat anything that they could find that their bodies didn't tell them that was bad for them, that was from their chest on up, including climbing trees. Now, that means that most of their food is coming from deep taprooted areas. Nigerian dwarf goats, Nubian goats come from desert areas, so the available water is going to be deep down in the soil. That's also where you're going to find the mineral layers. So, as a result, goats need a lot of minerals, and they're not native to New England or North America. So we need to supplement that with some mixtures of minerals in their feed and as a supplement that gives them the full ration that they need. Now, when people talk about what does a goat need, what does a goat eat, they usually are thinking about grain. Grain makes up less than 15% of the goat's diet, and actually, it isn't even necessary if they're given a good browse year round and a mineral supplement and lots of hay. But that's hard to do on a small farm in New England. So most of us supplement with a grain mixture as well as hay, and then whatever browse we can give them. One way we can make the browse more valuable is if we top dress the soil with a mineral blend like azomite, which stands for A to Z, and that's all the different minerals that we find in the soil. You top dress that on the area where you're going to be planting browse or where the goats are going to be wandering, and they can soak that up through their feet, or the plants will soak it up through their roots and carry it on up to the leaves. So I'm of the belief that if we can find a way to give them their minerals in a more natural way, either through the soil or through what they eat, um, then it's more successful than giving them inert minerals in a mineral feeder. But most of what we feed them is hay, and most of us don't have access to those fields. So we just have to look for the best hay that we can get. Hay simply means dried grass. Hay and straw are not synonymous with each other. In straw, it's simply the plant shaft. All of the insides have been taken out of it. Hence, well, it's like a straw that you would drink through. Hay is a dried grass or a dried browse. Alfalfa is not a grass, but it would dry out and be considered a hay, an alfalfa hay. Um, Goats really like second and third and maybe even fourth cutting. Generally in New England, we're lucky if we can get 3 cuttings in a year. Um, my goats are eating first cutting right now. My milkers don't want to touch it. Not even my horse wants to touch it, but she doesn't have much choice. First cut is the thicker grass. It's not as fine and soft, um, but it tends to have a lot of nutrition in it if they will eat it. I generally feed second and third cut to mine, um, and I feed a Timothy clover or a Timothy mix, um, a Timothy grass hay. Some people will feed a Timothy alfalfa mix. Alfalfa is very hard to grow in New England. We don't have that longer growing season, and we have a lot of migratory fowl that like to eat alfalfa. So, alfalfa is very expensive in New England. It's much more common in the Midwest and the Far West, and there it's often the easiest food for them to find. In New England, we pay a premium price for alfalfa. I'm fortunate. My farmer that I get my hay from has actually planted a small section that's a Timothy alfalfa mix and another section that's a Timothy clover mix. Both the alfalfa and the clover are legumes, which means that they actually attach nitrogen to the soil, making the soil, or to the plants, making the soil richer. It also means that they're going to be higher in protein than a grass hay. And when it comes to production and growth, it's all about the protein and not so much about the fat. With the rumen, we need that hay to just fill up that rumen chamber in the stomach system and um, let it percolate through. And it takes like 3 days, 2 to 3 days to finish a meal. But um, there's not a lot of straight nutrition that's coming out of that, unless it's alfalfa, in which case there's a good deal of protein that comes out of that. When we want to make sure that we're giving them good protein, that's when we go to feeding grains. And I've got some pictures here of the grains that I feed. I feed a pelletized grain for most of them. Um, this is my oats that I feed to my horse. It's a regular oats. It's not been processed. That's just what oats look like. This is my milker's mix. It has a pelleted food as well as barley. Um, the pelleted food for premium dairy goat is more than 20% protein. That's really high. So I don't want to get too much activity going and get them too revved up. It's called having hot food. So I actually cut that with barley, which is palatable but not high in protein. So they still get nutrition. They get some oils. They get some protein through the premium dairy goat, but it's tempered with some barley. And then this is my Milkmaker 16, which I feed that to my maintenance herd. Those are does who are either pregnant or in lactation, um, but their milk is going to be used for the family. So I can't feed them a medicated food, which is the meat goat grower that I feed is a medicated feed. The Milkmaker 16 gives them a good amount of nutrition, gives them protein, and keeps the protein and calcium and phosphorus balance, which is really important in keeping animals healthy. Keeps that there in place, but it's got enough extra protein in it with a 16% protein to help with delivery of kids. If I were just keeping dry stock, and I didn't have to worry about minerals, and I didn't have to worry about coccidia, then I would probably feed a 14% grain. But I want better production, and I want my kids to have more available food without harming the mother, so I feed a 16% maintenance ration. Then once the babies are born, then we up it to an 18 to 22% milker's ration. Okay, so when we say 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, those are the percentage of protein in the ration. The higher the protein, the more likely you have milk production. You're also more likely to have baby growth. So that's why I don't give that to my mothers until they've delivered or just before they deliver, because I don't want those kids to grow too big. Okay, so getting them fed. How do you do that? Well, you should put the hay up in mangers if you can. You do need to have mineral salts out there for them to get all the time. You can put your grain, if you're going to feed it, into the manger. I actually, rather than try to feed them all individually, my main herd is about 29 to 30 does right now. They share 6 buckets. So they each wind up getting about a half to 3/4 of a cup of grain a day over the course of 2 feedings, and all the hay that they can get. There's grass out there for to eat. We have pasture. When we extend pasture, there's browse for them. We occasionally bring browse into them, or trees or bushes or overgrown browse. We'll throw that in there, and they love it. It's a great treat for them. Now, what's what goes into a grain mix? If we look at the different components, there's usually soy or some type of soybean product, corn, barley, sorghum, wheat, milo, millet. All of those are pretty common grains. Usually soy is near the top list, meaning it's the heaviest component. Um, I would like to be able to avoid a soy food, to avoid a soy-based food at all. It's just hard to do with higher protein. If I could give them alfalfa, then I would completely go to a soyless food. I used to mix my own, and I wound up being deficient in some minerals. So we've gone back to feeding a soy-based grain. Why do I concern about soybean soy? Because almost all the soy in this country is genetically modified. It is raised to be Roundup ready. That's why I try to mix my own. Some people who are very concerned about it actually go to organic feeding. I don't feed organically because I don't think that there's been enough research done at the organic level. Most people who are feeding the original type of organic do not have the tools to do the breakdown of carbohydrates and minerals and everything that goes into that. And the big feed companies are the ones who do the research to see what's necessary and what is deficient and what needs to be addressed. And they don't do true organic. So it's my choice. It's up to everybody yet to make their own decisions. Now, I mentioned that I feed a medicated feed. That is medicated in two different ways. One of them is ammonium chloride. Ammonium chloride is used to acidify the urine. If we don't acidify the urine, and a male goat especially, females can get it, but it's very rare. But a male goat will actually get a blockage of the ureter. It's called urinary calculi, and it is a calcium buildup, which can be deadly. It's extremely uncomfortable and painful, but it can kill them. It's the most common cause of death in wethers and in bucks because people overfeed them and they don't give them acidifiers like ammonium chloride, or apple cider vinegar is another one. I get the feed that has the ammonium chloride right away, because then I make sure that every male gets it. I don't have to worry about whether or not somebody didn't get it. If they got grain, they got ammonium chloride. The other thing that's in my medicated feed is a decoquinate or decoquinate. That is a medication to kill coccidia. Coccidia is a parasite which is endemic to the world around us. It's everywhere. And animals do develop not a symbiotic, but a balanced approach to life with coccidia. They learn they have a carrying capacity that their body can fight down the infection. But if they are weak, if they're babies, if they're elderly, if they're sick, then that tipping point gets out of balance and the coccidia wins. By feeding a decoquinate in the feed, we actually are reinforcing that battle and helping the goats stay healthier. And it's not something that I want in my milk, however. And since my milkers usually have a different standard of care and cleanliness than my dry stock, which are just generally put out on pasture and fed and watered and wormed and not handled every day. So we're not as likely to see or see a problem with them as we would with the milkers. The milkers do not get a decoquinate. So those are the two things that I worry about in medicines in my feed. My mineral salts, there are all sorts of different kinds. You definitely want loose salts and not a block salt. Block salts generally are made with without copper in a blend that is suitable for sheep and goats. If it's a sheep and goat block, it will not work for your goats because it doesn't have copper in it, and copper is a requirement for goats. It is not a requirement for sheep. Some people will tell you that sheep cannot have copper at all. Um, Studies have shown a tiny bit is beneficial, but more than a tiny bit is deadly. Um, so I feed my grain that has copper in it, but I also want my mineral mix to have enough copper in it as well. It's also a way that I can make sure that they get the molybdenum and the manganese, the magnesium, all of the trace minerals that they need to have that they would normally get from running around in the African soil, but they don't get in New England. So I fed Golden Blend, I have fed Blue Seal. I'm now feeding Sweet Licks. There are 2 different types of Sweet Licks. I do not feed with the Rumensin, which is a medication which I don't need because I don't want it in my milkers. Spring Creek has some, but in New England, our primary sources are Purina, Blue Seal, Calf Manna. Actually, it's not called Calf Manna, but it's called Manna Pro. That's what it's called for goats. Or Goat Mineral from Calf Manna. Or we can get Sweet Licks. Those are the top ones that we get in New England. And those you just put out in a feeder and they will eat them as they need them. Goats will self-dose. If they find that they're really needy in something, they will eat a lot of it. If I find that a goat is not competing well and cannot get enough minerals, I will then use a supplement called Replemen Plus Gel. And that is a trace mineral supplement that comes as a paste. And they like the flavor of it. And I can just put it right in their mouths to give them about 5 cc's once a week or so. And you can overdo trace minerals, so you don't want to be too heavy-handed with them. But there are some goats that are needier than others. Goats that have had a real battle with coccidia, goats that are older. There are some lines that are just more copper needy than others. So Replemen is a good way to get the trace minerals as well as selenium into them. Okay? So the basics are you got to make sure they've got the minerals, keep their hay up off the ground if you can. Feed second or third cut, fourth cut, they would love. They can be very picky. If you find that you cannot get alfalfa or cannot get hay in the middle of the winter, which can sometimes happen, February and April, if you have not planned ahead, you can feed something called a hay stretcher, which is simply hay that has been ground up and pelletized, and you can feed that like you would feed a grain. But it's expensive, and they have to be introduced to it before they run out of hay. But it is an option. Also, if you've got does who are older, like some of my older does, they need a mash. They need the hay stretcher or alfalfa, rabbit food, alfalfa pellets. I also feed alfalfa cubes. I feed them to my horse. I also feed alfalfa, the shreds, to my milkers. If they are pregnant, we really want to make sure that they don't start leaching calcium from their own bodies to give to the babies. So we want to make sure that they can get the calcium which they get from their alfalfa. So if they're getting enough grain, if they're not heavy milkers, then you can just not worry about it. But if you got a doe who's a really heavy milker and she's carrying a lot of kids, you may want to make sure she has access to alfalfa pellets or alfalfa shreds so that you keep her calcium level up. Hypocalcemia is a real problem for heavy milking does. Okay? So that's about it for feeding. Next week we're going to go over medicines, and a lot of medicines and feed go hand in hand. So I thought about making this into one class, but I think it's going to be enough for you to handle. To just think about the feed. Remember that that the gesture tract of a goat is very different, and so we need to do two things. We need to make sure that rumen is well stocked for heat, and the bacteria in the rumen will break food down into sugars and things that they can just digest. But the minerals and the protein, for the most part, are going to come from the grains. Um, and if you're just got animals for pets, you don't need those grains. You can give them just a good quality forage. But if you've got milkers or you've got babies on the way, then you need to have those grains available to them as well. Okay? So I will see you on Thursday night, complete with my brews, no doubt. And the next week we'll be talking about medications. Okay? See you then. Bye.